Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Darshawn McAway. You're tuned in to Wow Podcast. By all means, go to wowpodcast.me. That's wowpodcast.me. Now, today we have a special guest. We have author James Morrow. He's here to talk to us about his latest book, The PURLOINED Republic. James, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good deal. So let's talk about The PURLOINED Republic. What is this book about?
It's a satire, a future history of the American Republic, focusing on the presidential administration of Mike Pence. It imagines a future in which Donald Trump has been reelected in 2020, and then Mike Pence succeeds him in the White House in 2024, whereupon California and Oregon and Washington get together, form a kind of republic of their own, and secede from the Union. I should say that the Purloined Republic is part of a collection of 3 novellas that will be published collectively under the title "And the Last Trump Shall Sound," coming out from Arc Manor, edited by Shahid Mahmoud. So I had a lot of fun with this wacky premise. It was not my premise. We were each of the 3 of us. The other 2 authors are Harry Turtledove and Cat Rambo. We were given this future history and told to just run with it. We each took it in a slightly different direction, although the novels do form a chronological sequence, and they allude to each other.
So why did you choose that title?
Well, it's one level, I guess it evokes the famous Edgar Allan Poe short story, The Purloined Letter, purloining meaning to steal, and I'm suggesting that the Republican Party, or particularly the Donald Trump cult within the Republican Party, has stolen our country. They've hijacked the democracy and replaced it with their authoritarian fantasies that they're acting out in the real world.
So your novella opens up years after ex-President Trump has died of a heart attack, and yet you managed to bring him on stage. How did you manage to do that?
Well, I should mention that my entire story is told from the point of view of a woman who for years made her living as an actress in adult films. We don't need to elaborate on that, but this is a family podcast. Is that right?
Yeah.
But anyway, she gets the job of pretending to be Mike Pence's spiritual advisor, or faith counselor, because she happens to be a dead ringer for the fictional character of Walker Lambert, who has been advising Pence in matters of faith. So she's hired by the equivalent of the CIA in this part of the Union that is now its own. The 3 states that have seceded, they call themselves Pacifica collectively, California and Oregon and Washington. She is hired by them to pretend to be the advisor and to offer all sorts of outrageous advice to Pence, the hope being that at some point some other states in the U.S. will want to secede, and this will weaken the Pence administration, which they regard as their dire enemy, and so all kinds of crazy directives start coming out of the White House, like declaring a poverty tax, which everybody at first hears as a property tax. No, a poverty tax, taxing people for being poor. This will inspire them to get some marketable skills, and making Ramadan illegal, and declaring Kristallnacht a national holiday, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, the most outrageous one, Pence becomes convinced that he has the power to bring Trump back from the dead. Trump has died. one too many double whoppers, as my colleague Harry Turtledove puts it in the first novella. In fact, Pence does not have the power to resurrect Donald Trump, but they managed to switch out Donald Trump's corpse for an automaton, one of those robots of the sort you see at Disney World, like the Pirates of the Caribbean, ride. I'm going to read just, if I might, Darshan, a piece of the resurrection scene, so I can call it up here.
By all means, go ahead.
Okay, here we go. So Trump has pronounced over the what he thinks is the corpse. It's really just this robot. Take Eden's clay in my hands, O ye angels of earth, and mold for this man a new body that he may walk among us once again. Donald John Trump, come forth. With the understandable awkwardness of a newly resuscitated corpse, Mr. Trump climbed the spiral staircase to the pulpit. This is all happening in the Washington National Cathedral. And pursing his lips, scanned the audience. Hello, all you smart and terrific ever Trumpers out there. I'm told they've never had so many American citizens in this church before. You probably believe it was Panty-Waist Pence who brought me back. Not true. I did it all myself. Me. Little Mikey's not a necromancer or any sort of romancer, I hear. Very frustrating for his wife. So there I am, lying in my casket in the Trump mausoleum, which is much bigger than Grant's tomb and the Pyramid of Cheops put together. And I got to thinking about how they say I'm a polarizing figure, but they also say I'm depolarizing because our great policies are causing the ice caps to melt. Make up your damn minds. Polarizing or depolarizing, which is it? All this whining about our planet being on fire, it's a swindle perpetrated by our corrupt deep state news media because only God can thaw a glacier, and if we really needed the ice, he would have let us keep it, but we don't need it. I've got plenty in my fridge, etc. This rant goes on for about four pages and comes very near the end of the novella.
Very interesting. The first thing I tend to think about when any author comes out with the book is, where did the inspiration come from? What was that moment for you when you realized that, hey, I want to write this particular book this type of way?
Yeah, well, in point of fact, Darshan, I turned down the assignment when the idea was first brought to me by the publisher / editor, Shahid Mahmoud, and I said to Shahid, I find this too depressing, and I think it defies satire. This idea of Trump not only getting a second term but then being succeeded by Donald Pence. So I turned it down, and then a couple of days later I said, wait a minute, I could imagine Pence resurrecting Donald Trump from the dead. And I said, okay, I've got to write that. I've got to put that on paper.
Right.
But there's something about the Trump administration, one could argue, that defies satire, right? I mean, this is, it's such it's a challenge. It's almost as if, like when Jonathan Swift wrote his classic burlesque in the early 18th century, A Modest Proposal, that essay in which he suggests that the impoverished Irish people could solve their economic problems by selling their children as food to rich gentlemen and ladies in England. It would be as if Trump was or Jonathan Swift were writing that essay in a world in which this had actually happened, that children really were being sold as food. So jumping ahead to today, one is at odds sometimes. It's a tall order to ridicule something that's already so hyperbolic as Trump's policies. But between my notion of the resurrection and then the premise of this actress impersonating and doing a kind of cross-gender impersonation of Mike Pence's spiritual advisor, I said, okay, I'm on board with this after all.
Now, I've been asking this question to myself a lot lately, and I've been trying to figure out what would my last words be if I decided to write my last book and I just didn't know what was going to happen moving forward. What do you want people to remember about you? Not to put this in a downer, but what would you want people to remember about you if you wrote your last book?
I like to think people will say James Morrow helped us recover the Enlightenment ideals that underlie this republic. The acknowledgement that humans are very fallible creatures, and so a government of checks and balances, a government that allows for human weakness while it celebrates freedom and diversity at the same time is so valuable, and we need to get that back.
Well, one last question before we go. What I want to know is, who is James Morrow?
I've written a lot of fiction, some of it published as science fiction, some as theological fantasy, some as more or less straightforward historical fiction, but with some sort of postmodern twists. And I guess on my tombstone it should say satirist. If it said science fiction writer, that would be fine with me too. But I sort of navigate by the great satirists of days gone by. You know, I worship at the altar of Voltaire, and I mentioned Jonathan Swift earlier, and certainly in more recent generations, Joseph Heller and Kurt Vonnegut Jr.
Well, you're listening to a Wow Podcast. I'm your host, Darshawn McAway. We're talking to author James Morrow about his latest book, The Purloined Republic. James, it was such a pleasure speaking with you.
I had a great time. I hope we can do it again, assuming I get to write another book.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Assuming I live long enough.
You will. You will.
Pretty likely. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
No problem.